Hi, everyone. Welcome to Practical Mystics, where we explore spiritual and multidimensional concepts and offer practical steps we can all use to create a deeper connection with ourselves, people in our lives, and the world we live in. I am Lisa Heidel, and I'm here with my very special guest today, Meg Gibbs, who is a somatic spiritual guide, certified coach, and author of Spiritually Parented, A Foot in Both Worlds. Meg has worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs, LGBTQ plus leaders, and creatives over the last 10 years. She helps people get in touch with their intuition, body, and spirit. Meg has studied shamanism since she was young, which has led to a lifelong journey of spiritual exploration with various healers and teachers from the US and South America. When not contemplating the mysteries of the universe, Meg loves dancing, having deep conversations over high-quality ice cream, and spending time with her dog. Welcome, Meg. So happy to have you on Practical Mystics.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I have a very important question right off the bat. What is your dog's name?
Yes, her name is Hallie, and she may or may not make an appearance at some point. She tends to wander around.
Okay. Well, she's very welcome here. We love pets so much here on Practical Mystics. And I'm not going to lie, I do very much.
Yeah.
But if she makes a guest, she is very welcome to sit in and join us.
Sounds good.
So happy to have you here. We're going to be talking about your book, Spiritually Parented, A Foot in Both Worlds, and your journey of, becoming a practical mystic in this world and what that means for you. So why don't we just jump into the questions? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so what does it mean to be spiritually parented?
Yeah. So for me, I feel like there's a lot of advice out there and how-to books about how to consciously parent or how to do this thing. And for me, this is coming from the opposite perspective. So it's coming from the perspective of a child who's been through a process of being consciously or spiritually parented. So it's less of a how to do this thing and more of this is the impact that it had on me personally. And then sort of those ripple effects that were created from my own relationship with my mom and our spiritual journey together as a family.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to put that. I think that, I always tell people I don't have children, and I'm like, but I was a child. So
Yeah.
I can tell you once again how something impacted me.
Yeah.
And when I read your book, and we'll tell the listeners a little bit, we'll go into more depth, but I want to let you know that when I read it, the beauty of it is the realization that we are not just parented by our parents or caregivers,
Mm.
right? We are spiritually parented by extended family, friends, teachers, guides, source, universe, God, whatever you believe in feels comfortable for you. And your book encompasses that. I felt that so strongly of how your mother was on her own spiritual journey and
Mhm.
modeled that for you.
Mhm.
And then you went and took what basically she taught you how to learn.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
you've taken that further in your life. So that was my takeaway from what you wrote.
Yeah. And I see it as a lot of like intersecting circles or Venn diagrams and stuff like that. Like it's definitely part of that community oriented, it takes a village mindset. Specifically my experience with the queer community, growing up with lesbian moms and having um being gay being normalized, that being a loving place, having my family be something that's celebrated at home, that's not always mirrored in the larger society. And so having that be both a communal experience and also a sacred experience, like it's something that we have a direct relation, every person in my experience has a direct relationship to spirit. And so this idea of however you think of spirit as something that, whether it's like a parental figure or a guide or source or something that you can draw energy and awareness from, but that there's this like multidimensional relationship, I think, is what you're touching on, that does really resonate with me, that it's more than just your direct bloodline of a parent that parents you, that it really is like all of these pieces coming together.
Can you tell our listeners, what your journey through this was? Like you just mentioned your mom's
Mhm.
and your close relationship to your mother who's passed, and
Mhm.
how that has led you to where you are today.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Would you bite size it?
Let's see. Yeah, so trying to think of even where to start. I would say I definitely identify as like a spirit baby myself, that there was a relationship before I even became a person to my mom, that my mom and I had a sacred and spiritual connection. And one of the stories in the book is called something like Being on the Edge of a Star. And we had this storyline in our like familial mythos of how it came about, which is like, she's like, your soul was waiting on the edge of a star to be born, and it jumped down into my womb when it was time. And so for us, there's always been this kind of mystical and magical experience around our relationship. And then as my mom grew in her own spiritual journey, that basically like expanded my journey tenfold. So every time she took a step further or deeper in a certain direction, then it was almost like a slinky, where it would be like there was an expansion and then there would be me kind of catching up to her, and she would go into a place and then I would catch up to her. So there was a time where she would kind of journey forward without me on purpose, to be able to check in and see, is this a place that I want to go? Is this safe? Is this something I want to bring into my family and my daughter's life? So there was always this sense of connection, but it had both an expansion and closeness aspect to it, if that makes sense.
It does, and that's beautifully explained. And and that's what parents do, right?
Mm.
They're out in front
Mm.
and they're clearing the path.
Mhm.
And that idea, and it sounds like she was aware of it. Like it
Mhm.
was a very intentional act to, before I bring this into the home, I
Mhm.
must make sure it's safe for my child.
Yeah,
Mm.
and for me, that also echoes any leadership experience that I take on myself, or that I see in the world. Like, we have to walk that path first before we take others with us, especially I don't know if you do any type of like coaching or healing work one-on-one with people, but that phrase, you can't take somebody deeper than you've gone yourself. And so that was something that didn't just show up in a professional context in my life, that showed up in a personal context as well, for sure.
Oh, I love that. And that is a good leader,
Mhm.
right? The leader is going into those darker places within their psyche, and then, their shadow areas, if you will, and saying, okay, I need to heal this before I can expect anyone who's going to follow me
Mhm.
to be able to look at that for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I'm guessing that your listeners can also relate to is this idea of what I call cycle breakers, which is definitely how I would identify my mom. And I think women of a certain generation, there's all of this stuff that was passed down almost unconsciously and just accepted, that, oh, there's like sexual abuse, or women aren't allowed to do certain things in the world, or you need a man's protection, or all of that. And so my mom really stepped out of the way that she was raised and took on this role of being a cycle breaker. She was a therapist and a healer and a Reiki master, but she did all of that work as a taking what had come her way and been like, no more. We're not doing that anymore. I'm not passing that on to the next generation. And so that's something that I really admire and lift up, because that takes a lot of strength to be the person to say, we're not going to do it the way that it's been done before.
Yeah, definitely. It does take strength, and it also takes a recognition of the love that you hold for yourself and for your child.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I refuse, I will, every child has baggage, right? But they're not going to carry that baggage.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And just since we're talking about parenting so much, one of the things that I want to say is I wrote this book with two avenues in mind. One is specifically around parents who are raising children, who want to raise children with a sense of spirituality, or maybe they have like a spiritually gifted kid and they kind of don't know what to do with that
Mm.
because that's not a path that they've walked before. But the other half of the book is really for people who don't have children. And it's just about reparenting ourselves because of our own lineage and trauma and the experiences that we've had, because reparenting ourselves and healing those wounds, being kind to like the part of you that didn't receive the support or wisdom or guidance that you needed at that time before. This is something that is very individualized. So just to be clear that it's not something just for parents, it really is for people who are working on their own integration and healing journey as well.
Thank you for clarifying that, because that was my takeaway as well. Like, this is available for everyone to read through that is interested in, a spiritual life,
Yeah.
opening themselves up to the unseen, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think you possibly just gave me the title for your second book,
Oh.
The Spiritually Gifted Kid. Right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you are spiritually gifted from reading your book. This has been something that not only were you aware of, but your parents were aware of. Your moms knew that you had a gift. And you wrote in your book, my moms acknowledged my gifts early on and nurtured them.
Mhm.
I never shut down or shied away from claiming these intuitive experiences, because my family always lifted them up and honored them.
Mhm.
And it's so beautiful to recognize that, um, as a child, like you were spiritually gifted, but most children are. I have to say,
Mhm.
I've worked with children for years. I've yet to find one that isn't
Mhm.
at least, excited about the magic of life
Mhm.
through
Mhm.
nature, animals, love, connection with others. And that in your home, it was acknowledged and celebrated.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's beautiful. It really is. Now but you had a foot in both worlds.
Mhm.
And you wrote so candidly about your struggles, where you had this connection to, the mystical, the magic, the spiritual at home,
Mhm.
and then you would step out into the world. And I think so many parents, that's their fear.
Mhm.
How are they going to be treated? So
Mhm.
can you speak a little bit about the flip side of that coin in your life, about stepping out into the
Yeah, I mean, the answer is spoiler alert, not well.
world?
Like I it didn't go well. I went through public school in Atlanta and kids were not having the same experience I was. And not only that, they weren't necessarily very respectful or honoring of that different experience. And so for me, it created a lot of internal turmoil around how do I honor both of these things, where on the weekends I'm going to workshops or I'm going out with my mom on to the earth or to a mountain and we're connecting with the earth and we're, kind of talking with nature spirits and, learning about intuition and inner wisdom and how to seek guidance outside of ourselves in a nature specific space, because that is so much of what shamanism is connected to, is that nature aspect. um, but when I went to school, kids were not having those conversations and they were talking about video games or going to the mall or that kind of thing. And I I remember this feeling of like almost pulling my hair out and saying at different times, like, God, I just want to be normal. I just want to be normal. And the truth is, logistically, I had no chance of being normal this lifetime.
Yeah.
That was not in the cards. So from a very young age, it just was something that I think, because it was celebrated at home, that so much of the container, like the sacred container that I bring to the work that I do with other people, because that's not what they experience. They experience the opposite, where often their gifts are shut down, and at home somebody's saying, you're so weird, you're too sensitive, what are you talking about, what do you mean, that doesn't make any sense, like. And so we just kind of shrink, like people get small and they lose. It's almost like the thread of a balloon, like you lose the grip on the balloon because of this outside pressure to look a certain way or act a certain way. And that's often why I have people come to me in their 50s who are like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're so right. As a kid, I did have access to this. And I love what you said about every kid has access to that. And it's so beautiful because it's so natural and it's so intuitive. And it's something that um, it's either nurtured and that river can continue flowing, or it's completely picked apart and shut down. And it's like literally like building a dam, right? And so if somebody has that spiritual part of them walled off, then just like any muscle, we lose access to how to do that. But for me, the good news is like you can always wake it back up. Like that's the beautiful thing. It's never gone. It's not something that can be beaten out of you to the point that it no longer exists. Like there's always a spark, there's always a connection. But again, even us having this conversation, that is not the conversation I was having at school or in
Yeah.
dance class or, after school with other friends. So it just was something that as I got older, I would say kids got meaner. It was something that was not well received the further I got into my training and the more deeper experiences I had with spirit. It there was a wider gap between these two worlds. And that's really what I mean, is it feels very physical and embodied to me to have a foot in both worlds and not having to choose one or the other. Where I think as a kid navigating that, it felt like I was going to have to make a choice. And either I have to let go of this spiritual experience and step into this very mainstream, like, oh, I'm going to do what society wants me to do, and I'm going to act this way, and I'm going to look this way and not be so weird. Or I have to let go of that. And then it's all crystals and rainbows and butterflies. And then there's no connection to the real world. And I personally didn't want that either. Like, I think that that's a path for some people, but I learned really early on, like, oh, I don't actually want to go be a monk on a mountainside. And there are people who do, but that's just not my path. And I have tended to be a city girl. And so, like, I want to be in a city, I want to have access to culture and experiences, but that can also create friction with some of that, like, deeper craving for spirit and nature and slowing down, connecting in that way. So it's a very long explanation.
No, it's so good. No, it's so good. And I mean, there's so much that what you just said there, because that's why this channel exists. It's practical mystics. We are of this world. We are supposed to be, in my belief, we're supposed to be enjoying this.
Yeah.
Earth is for manifestation. It is for creation. It is for connection. I mean, you can't look around and not see that, and I think we forget that the practical aspects of, we have to feed the form, we have to move the form, we need other people to survive, all of these are very practical aspects of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And then we also have this mystical aspect, and we've all felt it, if, seeing a child born or an animal born, love between, you and a partner, you and a parent, you and a child. I mean, we've all felt these deeper emotional, almost otherworldly connections and feelings and had these experiences. I mean, right now, all over the news is the aurora borealis, right? People
Mm-hmm.
are seeing this. Now, scientifically, we can say this is why it's occurring, but
Mm,
it feels like magic.
mm,
It's
yeah,
art, right? It's
yeah.
like nature is painting us a picture,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what you just said was so beautiful, is finding that space between the two, if you will, the overlap in the Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So with your moms being very aware, your mother, um, how did she receive your struggle
Mm.
with, trying to fit in with your peer group, and then also being almost resisting a little bit of your natural state?
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting question because I feel like very informed by her being a therapist. And so she was a like supreme advice giver, which is one of the things I miss most now that she's gone, right? Is this connection of just having like such wise counsel on the couch, in the kitchen, that kind of thing. Um, and she saw me come home from school crying, and I would get so upset getting off the bus or having difficulty making friends or not understanding why, again, I couldn't fit in or kids didn't like me, or I would try and fit in. And then it's that whole like kind of image of like lipstick on a pig where you're like, look, this is the same as everybody else. And it just wasn't. And I think as I got older, one of the through lines just from very, very young is always about authenticity, always about honoring who you are. And so I think she really encouraged me to be who I was. And so she created spaces for that to be more explicit, I would say. And whether that was, we grew up going to like lesbian and gay family picnics. And even though that's not a very like mystical part of my life, just the practicality of having a space where we weren't questioned or made fun of or told to be different. And it was all of these kids running around in this really safe atmosphere and going to parks and stuff like that, that there was just so much love and abundance of like, I think our parents in that way shielded us from some of the struggles that they went through. And so for me to be going through, I wouldn't even call it an identity struggle, but it was about my identity in the world. And it was more about me actively being me in the world. Like it was the both and. And so there were times where in the book I talk about like, I specifically remember like putting ribbons in my hair and making up routines for the cheerleaders because I wanted to fit in. And like, I just, it's just like you look back on that and you're like, oh, sweet girl. Let's find you some other weirdos to be friends with, you know? And so as I've gotten older, that like finding spiritual friends, even if we're not the same exact form of spirituality, but that there's a connection to spirit, has been a stronghold in my life. Always looking for people who are open to that mystical and beyond just our physical form experience. That to me is something that was really beautiful. And now it's interesting. I have two friends who became like family, and we grew up together, and my moms were sort of like their second family. And now as adults, the way that they talk about our family and the way that they talk about how magic and connection, like they might not call it connection to spirit, but connection to something bigger than us, like learning to walk a labyrinth and listen to your intuitive guidance, or going and sitting on the earth when you need to refuel, like these things that were small, weird moments in my life. It's like, I will say that once the right people came in, they really, really clicked in.
Mm. So you had a foundation to know what love felt like.
Mhm. Mhm.
Really. I mean, your mother created that foundation of secure attachment for you.
Mhm.
So even though it took a while to find it within outside of the family home,
Mhm.
but when it showed up,
Mhm.
you knew because that's what love feels like.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm,
for sure.
yeah.
And a lot of acceptance around different people's weirdness, whatever their version of that is, and knowing that like there's wisdom in weirdness. There's something really cool there. So,
Mm. I love what you said about people come to you now at like 50,
mm,
and they're like all of a sudden like, hey, I used to do this when I was a kid, and now I'm feeling like I'm supposed to be doing it now. And I truly believe that those gifts demand release. And I
mm,
think that's, you can only hold it down. It's like a balloon under the water for
right.
so long. And I know for myself, as a creative, I always had a creative outlet,
Mm,
but I didn't really ever consider it spiritual.
mhm,
And then once I realized that this is almost like a channeling is what it feels like for me to create, I was like, it kind of opened a door for me to be like, oh, what else is out here? And other gifts have started to open up for me and show themselves. So I
mhm,
love that you said that, we don't have to, now that it's becoming part of the vernacular and part of the conversation, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so in British Columbia, it's all, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Can't throw a rock with hitting a Reiki master,
right. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so as this is starting to open up, it's like, oh, we can start this very early with the children.
Mhm,
We can change
mhm.
the trajectory of their lives by saying you don't have to repress, you don't have to suppress. Yeah,
Yeah,
these
absolutely.
gifts. Okay. Well, talk about suppression and repression. Okay.
Yeah,
You wrote in your book that your least favorite spiritual practice
yeah,
is surrender.
yes, yeah.
And I have to tell you, I stopped and I'm like, yes.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about when and how, and whether tell us your journey on when you've just surrendered into this life path
Mhm.
for yourself. Can you speak a bit about
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that that resonated with you, because I think one of the things that can happen when people speak from like a spiritual guidance or teacher standpoint is it can become this monolith of like putting somebody on a pedestal of like, oh, they're perfect. Oh, they've got it all together, figured out, and have no, they don't have any issues. Like that's not true. That's not true. That's never true. We always have both and, right? Like so much of our experience is light and shadow and just different elements of that. When people keep saying something to you over and over again, you're like, "Oh my god, leave me alone." And so there were so many times where my mom would talk to me about like, "Well, you just have to like surrender that over, or you just have to surrender to the moment, or you have to surrender." And I was like, absolutely not. Like I'm going to think really hard. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to do the thing, which definitely comes from being like a hard worker, but also having anxiety and that kind of stuff. And so I talk in the book of so much of my experience. So I have a dance background, and I actually just coincidentally, the same year that I started working with a Lakota teacher and studying shamanism is the same year I started dancing. And so there's just always been this kind of like DNA for me of the both and. And one of the pieces in spirituality that I find most frustrating is that most people don't get into their body and don't connect, that it's just this like very like ethereal experience. So the reason I say that is because the surrender journey that I talk about in the book is about physically laying in this river and letting go. And I was like, oh, this feels nice. This feels good. This is not the same as like, you can pry that from my cold, dead hands. So, so when I think of surrender, there are moments where now I think of other people's teachings or phrases that come in, and I think of that one that's let go and let God. God is not a word that I use when I talk about spirit or the creator, but I can appreciate where that's coming from and what they're referring to. And so for me, surrender really is an active experience. Like it is not passive. And I think my learning about it is learning how to do it before it's the 11th hour, like learning before the rope has become so frayed that it's about to break. Like, how can I do this on step 3 instead of step 9.5? So yeah, it's a
I like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
right there.
physical release for me. And it's something that there are times that I can find my way in through thought. But the truth is, if it's something that I've been thinking about over and over and over again and trying to figure out, and it's just really not working, those are the moments where I go, okay, spirit, like, I clearly can't do this. It's not up to me. So I have to let it go. And it has to be like a physical, like, I'm going to hand it over. I'm going to give it from my heart to yours and trust that you're going to hold this with me. And that piece of it, that someone else is going to hold it with me, that is how I can surrender more easily, is when I can think of either a community or a person or spirit reaching out and taking this sort of out of my body and holding it in a space that is not up to me. But it is not my favorite.
I so resonates with me because I feel, I mean, I actually envision myself sometimes like wrestling with spirit, like like
Mm.
one of us is going down, right? Like it's like it's not going to be spirit, and I know that, and but I'm very similar, and for me, my language is staying too long at the party, like
Mhm.
I'm like, I will fix this. I will make this better. I will improve it. And, it's like at a certain point, it's like, no, I surrender. I detach from it, because there's other things for me to be doing. And my will is not strong enough alone to do this. And, that's my life's work, that and boundaries.
we we all get a repetitious pattern that we get to work
Yep.
on.
So I love that. And it really did resonate. And I think it's going to resonate with a lot of our listeners that when I don't think we understand, I think people think that when you surrender, it means that you failed.
Oh.
And it's like, no, surrender is trusting that what is meant for your highest good
Mhm.
will be for your highest good,
Mhm.
right? That it's going to unfold. And
Mhm.
it may be a loss. It
Mhm.
may be an ending that you don't want to happen. But without that ending, you can't have the new beginning.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not possible. So it's surrendering that what is meant to be is going to be.
Mhm.
And I know that sounds very performative, if you will, but
Mhm.
it's like, well, you were saying from my heart. You actually have to feel it
Yeah.
and let go.
Yeah. I mean,
I
that's
mean,
the tricky part, is like recognizing some of that human powerlessness that we all have, that is so hard and so challenging to just be like, well, what do you mean I can't fix it? Like you were saying, staying at the party too long, of being like, no, no, just one more thing, just one more conversation, just one more. And sometimes you're just like digging a hole deeper and deeper.
yep.
Yeah.
And then can't get out of it till someone drops that ladder in, right? Like
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
can't. So, oh, thank you for sharing that. But that really did resonate. Actually, quite a few things resonated in your book. So, but I want the readers to find what resonates for them.
Thank
Now, let's talk a little bit about your offerings because you are a somatic spiritual guide
you.
and a certified coach, and of course, an author.
Mhm.
And you wrote that you found your love language, and it happened to be sharing energy. Now, of the five, that's not in there, right? But it should
No.
be.
Great. Great.
So, and when I read that again, that really resonated because one, I think that's a gift when
Mhm.
you can share energy with
Mhm.
other beings.
Mhm.
And that to me, I honor that. So, can you talk a little bit about what that means of sharing energy and how you use that in your somatic work?
Yeah. So for me, it's something that comes up in both the personal and professional realm. And personally, with friends or with partners or people who I connect to on a spiritual plane, on a spiritual level as well, it's something that we can go beyond words into that kind of beautiful energetic space. And professionally, the way that I work with clients is I always call it you, me, and spirit. Like it's us three. And so it's something bigger than us. It's something that is going to be co-created in the moment. It's something that's not planned or can be like mapped out of A to B to C. It's something that you show up and I show up and spirit shows up. And in that conglomeration, there's something sacred and magical that only happens in that instance that can never be repeated again. It's something that if I lead a workshop, I'll say to people, whether there's 4 people there or 200 people, it's like you and your presence make this experience. It would be totally different without you. And I mean that because everybody's energy and where they come from and what they're looking for influences what gets co-created. So, yeah, so when I work with people one-on-one, I often do like a guided meditation or something to get people grounded. And then as we're kind of traveling for answers, so let's say we're opening up into the spirit realm and we're asking for guidance from their spirit guides or their higher wisdom, my higher wisdom, we're kind of calling in that energy that I really believe that it's something that is beyond just our physical form, that it's something that is, um, again, accessible to everyone, but we have to learn how to like call in to that phone number. You have to like practice that experience. And that's the power of working with a healer or a guide or somebody who knows about that. It's like, if you were like, well, I call them every day, so you're welcome to join my conference line, is kind of how I see it, where it's like, come into this connection, step into this world with me that you have access to as well, but might not know how to get there by yourself. And so when I work with clients, they really are working energetic and spiritual realm, no matter what they bring to the table. So if I have a client who comes in talking about a job interview that didn't go well, or they're having issues with their partner, or they're struggling with their kids, or they want to talk about money and finances or building their business, like it actually doesn't matter because the way that we're going to approach it is going to be quite different than therapist or other coaches who are talking about like the logistics of how to get into action, yada, yada. Because when you have access to your intuition, to me, that's like the most powerful construct we can tap into because there's no competition. There's nobody else who can match you or beat you in that realm. And it's something that comes through us. Like it's a power of connection and something that it's just so fast and often direct and simple. Like that's one of the ways that I know something is intuitive versus like it's not complicated. There's not like a 16-step system. It really is, like I said, just you, me, and spirit showing up in this moment, taking this topic to it and saying, hey, I really need some help and some guidance with this. What are some ways that I haven't seen this before?
And in your book, I love the analogy that you use, that it's like tuning into a radio dial,
Mhm.
right? Trying to, because I travel a lot, so I'm always searching for the stations, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you get a clear signal,
Yeah.
and that's intuition. Now, I didn't do anything.
Mm.
It's not like I'm inside the radio messing with components or anything. I'm just dialing in
Yeah. Yeah.
and finding the clear signal. And yes, the best way in my book to do that is to get still, to
Mhm.
get quiet, to, put the phone down,
Yeah.
right? Right. To do all these things and just be with yourself long enough for, as the sediment to settle.
Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
have the clear water and you can actually feel and hear what's being given to you.
Yeah.
And as a somatic energy spiritual guide, you're very embodied, right? That's really where you're focusing the attention,
Mhm.
is into the body.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about how you guide someone there?
Yeah. So somatic just means the connection of mind, body, and spirit. So it really is, again, this idea that everybody who has a body has access. And I say that because I think sometimes in spirituality, people can get afraid, or they're like, oh, I'm not gifted in that way, or I don't have um access to that, or I don't know how to do that thing. And for me, it really is like it's a learning process. And it's something that everybody truly can get to. But like you said, there's like a moment where the noise has to calm down, the sediment has to settle. And so again, in so many spiritual spaces, there can be this sense of like going out, right? So we can kind of think of like a medium or a channel, and the idea is they kind of leave their body and they go out into this mystical unnameable realm. And in shamanic work, it really is the connection of both, and spirit and the earth, and the body for me is connected to the earth. So that's why I do so much grounding practice and connecting to the body, is because um, I think because I have this dance background, I just always heard a lot from my body. My body was just always very vocal. And so when I started connecting that, not just to an inner dialogue, but to an intuitive knowing of, oh, that movement hurts and I don't know why, or, oh, this feels so good. And then I can start to connect it to a bigger metaphor. One example is I like to work with clients over the phone rather than on video, just because you can ask someone to stand up and do weird stuff in their living room and they're not so worried about being watched. And so when that happens, there's a sense of like, to answer your question really, really succinctly, the moment you asked me, I was like, oh, somatic connection can just literally mean breath. Like, what do I notice in that breath? What am I holding on to? What am I letting go? Like there's a million questions that can be asked in that one moment experience. So for me, it comes back to, if you have a body, you can access intuition and spirit. And knowing that is really empowering, especially for people who think their way through things a lot. Like a big part of my ideal client are like really smart people who get in their own way. Right?
I think that might be me.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like you can work through things, you can figure it out, you can write the book, you can get it done, you can be successful in business. But
Yeah.
then there's this thing, there's something calling to you, or there's something in your heart that doesn't quite feel aligned, or there's a struggle that um you're kind of listening to some of the bigger questions that not everybody is listening to. All of that to me is like very grounded in our body. What's going on with your gut? oh, what is your shoulder thinking about that? And I say that because it's like somebody who has a shoulder injury or is disconnected from their body or isn't able to um access the wisdom that might be there. That's my job, is like to ask questions and to draw that out. It's not necessarily to say, here's the answer, here's what's wrong, here's the way to fix it. It really is for us to sit with that together and to pull from this third entity, which, I call spirit, but people call a lot of different things. So
I love that, because we are so disconnected from our bodies. We've been shamed, we've been guilted, we've, been told that, only from here up matters. And, to be able to love your vehicle, your vessel, and it may take a lifetime to get there, to undo the conditioning and
yeah.
the wounds that have occurred. But it's such good work, because, your body, it responds so well to that. Like, a little bit of tender TLC and watch it flower, right? Like watch it grow, and in a healthy way. And it's so beautiful. So I love this work that you're doing. And in your book, you do such a great job of explaining, and you have exercises in there for people to do. And of course, I do all the things before I have a guest on, and I really enjoyed myself tremendously
Oh,
doing
cool.
it, and learned a lot of things. I was like, oh, that
Mhm.
was fascinating. One, I
Cool.
learned I had a compass on the phone. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but it was such a valuable experience. So I highly recommend people to, get your book, Spiritually Parented, A Foot in Both Worlds, and do the exercises, because once again, practical steps,
Yep.
right, on how to connect deeper. So I have two questions for you. Let me ask the first one. So let's say that you're a parent out there, or someone who's doing some inner child work, and you really want to help, yourself or your child. What is one piece of advice you would offer if you see that you have a spiritually gifted child, and how to guide them?
Mm-hmm. My first response is listen to them. And I say that because so often, as a parental guide, and I'll say this, I don't have kids, right? So part of writing this book was also the recognition of, like I said in the beginning, this coming from a child's perspective of how I was raised, and knowing what it is like to be well parented and well loved in that way. And one of the things my mom always did was listen to me. And so when I would say, I see a light over there, she wouldn't be like, that's bull. I don't know what you're talking about. That's weird. She would say, tell me more about that. And I just remember that there was permission to be in that space. And so that's the first thing I would say, is like asking these open, honest, curious questions to your child, or to that part of yourself that was shut down, to say, like even something that I love that's super practical is going on an intuitive walk. So this is something you can do by yourself. You can do it with a friend. You can do it with your kid, whatever. And instead of, oh, we always take this path, get to the edge of the block and say, do I want to go forward, left, or right? Okay. Oh, I wonder what that tree feels like. I'm going to go over and touch that plant. I've never done that. That's kind of weird. Okay. Okay. What if I just stay in non-judgment and I keep looking? And I have found so many wonderful things in the world through this intuitive approach. I even use this when grocery shopping. So there are moments where I will go and pick something up and I'll be like, yes, I want this. And it'll be like, no, you don't. I'm like, okay. And I'll put it back and I'll be like, but it was on the list, or I really wanted this thing, or like whatever. But there are just moments where my body doesn't want that. And so that, to me, of listen to yourself or to your kid and openly ask questions about it. Like it's okay to disagree or not understand, but instead of saying no, or we're not going to do that. And the truth is, like, you don't have time all the time if that's not how you set up your life. Like, there are people who want to live in a more intuitive way, but I would say just block off time for yourself. And that could be literally a 15-minute walk around the neighborhood. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Or it could be like you're driving home from an appointment and you're like, I really feel called to go in this direction, or I want to go check out this store, or whatever it is. There's usually a reason. There's something that's pulling you there. And for me, that something is our intuitive muscle or our connection to spirit. And so that would be my practical advice, is set up intuitive time in your calendar so that you can just be in that space. And one other just random example, since I know having some concrete things to hold on to is helpful, um, is you can journal. Like, of course, that's a really good one, to be able to ask yourself a question and answer with dialogue, to be able to say, like, what's holding me back right now? What's getting in the way? And just give yourself 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Um, when I kind of hit the wall around a lot of my thinking patterns and I've tried to figure something out, I will take a bath, because I need no screen, no interruption, just to be and just to sit. And also that connection with water for me is really important, recreating that flow. So yeah, so it's something that, like, anytime that you can create some space to tap into that intuitive muscle, setting a parameter and a time can be helpful. You can also have an intuitive day. I've had those where I'm like, from sun up to sundown today, I'm just going to listen to my intuition. And sometimes that includes taking a nap. Sometimes that's taking an adventure somewhere. So, yeah.
I love that, because it's also reminding you to check in with your body,
Mhm.
right? Like, because we all have a task list, right?
Yep.
Check them off as you go through the day. It's like, well, what if I have unstructured time
Mhm.
where I just go for a walk because I feel like going for a walk, not because I need to exercise, not because, I haven't got my 10,000 steps in, for just because I feel drawn to do it, and opening up to that. And, you know, I personally find that when I have those days, one, there's more magic in it,
Mhm.
and I don't feel so much resistance
Mhm.
to, like, I go, go, go. Like, it's just like, let it unfold, right? We have a lot of conditioning
Mhm.
that has made us feel like that's a really bad thing to do. Like, we're
Mhm.
doing something wrong when we're not, one thing after the other. And in reality, it's like, no, that's how we're supposed to live.
Yeah.
The other way is the way that's kind of messing us up a little bit. So I love that. Once again, the book is Spiritually Parented, A Foot in Both Worlds. I highly recommend it. The information will be in the description notes for people who are interested in purchasing the book. I want to ask, do you have any one last thing to share with our listeners? One, it's been a pleasure having you and learning from you. This is just like catnip for me. I just love it. So, anything else you'd like to share with the listeners before we sign off here, Meg?
Yeah. Well, you're lovely to talk to. This is a very fun topic, for me, for sure. And I would say one thing that I always want to be super open about is that I am a white woman who has learned from Indigenous teachers and been walking a shamanic path for over 25 years now. And so for me, this is something that, um, in our society, and being really aware of cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, it's something that is important to me, so that it doesn't come across as being whitewashed or taken from. And so I always cite my sources, cite my teachers. I also will be clear when something is more intuitively driven for me. So when it's something that I was given a really specific format around, like the medicine wheel is talked about a lot, that is not something that I by any means created. It's something that was taught to me in a very specific manner, and I work to honor those teachers and the cultures that it comes from. And for me, it's important to also share from the context of the teachers want this knowledge to be known and to be shared. There are some tribes and there are some experiences where that is not the case, where there are things that are only for their people, and I respect and honor that. And so that's something that I wanted to make sure I mention, because it's something that, as a white person who does shamanic work, again, it's a foot in both worlds. It's being in both of those spaces and honoring that it is not my specific DNA or bloodline, but it is my spiritual lineage. It's something that I have worked really thoroughly with different teachers and healers, and have been given, what would I say, permission and respect to take some of those teachings forward into the world.
Oh, beautifully. What a way to end. That is so perfectly. And thank you for saying that, because that is always a concern, because we always want to be respectful and mindful of how we're using information, and not appropriating it. And so that was beautifully put. Thank you. Now, if people want to find you, Meg, how can they do that? Both website and your social platforms.
Yeah, so my website is just my name, meggibbs.com. So www.meggibbs.com. And it has my book on there, different ways to order it. And if you want to order it from me directly through the website, I can do a signed copy and mail it to you. So that's fun. And then obviously, you can get it literally at any local bookstore you can order it from, or you can order it from the larger platforms as well. And then on Instagram, my handle is at Meg Gibbs Writes. And so that is my writing and author profile platform. So I talk about the writing experience leading up to this book, marketing the book itself, and then also the teachings and process. And what I really like to include is stuff around embodied writing experiences. Every once in a while I teach workshops and stuff like that, and that will always be on my website, shouted out there as well. So
Oh, that's so good. All this information will be in the description, so people can find that. And of course, on lisaheidel.com, you're going to find all this information so that you can actually find Meg a little easier. Of course, using her platforms, but other platforms, because that's what we do as writers, right? We support each other. So I so love this. I'd love to have you back in the future, Meg. I think we've just touched
scratch the surface. Yeah.
just the surface of this. And I truly loved having you here on Practical Mystics.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm grateful for our time together. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone, make sure to check out Meg's information in the description, and follow her on her platforms, and buy Spiritually Parented, A Foot in Both Worlds. All right, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.